All right, welcome back for another episode with my favorite guest, my husband Jake, who is a wildlife biologist. I wanted to start by saying that Jake and I have completely different brains, which is why I think we're extremely compatible. We enjoy different things, react very differently to different substances, and prefer doing different things around the house and really struggle doing other tasks. Personally, I can't seem to remember to ever switch the laundry, and Jake despises the act of doing dishes. So recently we started doing something where he does all of the laundry and I do all of the dishes. And honestly, it's working out amazing. So if you and your partner have similar struggles, it may be worth a try. After I posted the last episode with Jake, we briefly discussed his research with moose, and people were asking us to go into much more detail about the process of researching wildlife. I think we have a few potential future wildlife biologists in the audience. So in this episode, we're going to go into detail about radio collaring moose, counting ticks, how climate change affects these moose populations in New England, and much more. Then I'm going to dive into the chemistry of my favorite fungus, Anonotus obliquus, or chaga, and also discuss how you can make chaga products at home, followed by a big announcement at the 1 hour mark if you want to tune into that. And finally, the origin story of the phrase mad love, which I end every episode with. I originally was going to post this episode in the middle of winter, but upon editing it, I realized that now is actually the perfect time because we discussed this very specific time period that we're in right now, which is the transition period from winter to spring. And it's even more relevant because, at least in New England, this has been a very mild winter and it's been an early spring, which you'll see why that's relevant later in this episode. The next time Jake will be on will be a little warmer and a bit more spring, so we're going to talk about our main spring forages, which are wild leeks, also known as ramps, fiddleheads, which are an edible fern, and morel mushrooms. I'll discuss the chemistry and medicinal benefits, and Jake will help us learn about how to read the landscapes when looking for these wild medicinals. Oh, man, I love these episodes.
Rick, come here. There's a box on the floor, so.
Understandable. All right, cool. So we're drinking wine today, which we've never done on the podcast before, but it's Valentine's Day. So cheers to us. And we're going to talk about just some things we have going on in our life right now, but also some cool science, but on the biology side, because that's Jake's background as a wildlife biologist. And as everyone knows, I think learning from nature, being in nature is a good way to just learn about systems and how energy systems, how we can be better people, how we can be better stewards to our environment. And I think learning more about biology and especially wildlife is a great resource for that. So, hi, Jake.
Thanks for having me back, Riley. It's good to be here.
We have a few topics we want to discuss today, so I think it'll be fun.
We're really hoping that we can get Joey.
Yeah, we're trying to get our dog up here because he's always up here with us, but for some reason he's being camera shy.
You can tell that he's on film.
All right. I think the first thing I would love to talk to you about and for people to learn about, because it's so cool, is your research on moose, your graduate school research on moose. And I think we've mentioned this before, that you did research moose, but I think we've kept it pretty vague. So I think today we'll get into the details a little bit.
Yeah. So I guess a little bit about my background, how I ended up in the biology field. This will lead to moose, I promise.
Yeah, I'm like, what age are we starting at?
Yeah, so it all started in 93. No, so I, grew up, loved animals, wanted to pursue a career in the wildlife field, didn't know what that was going to look like. That ended up, starting off just generally in undergrad at the University of New Hampshire in the wildlife ecology program. And it was junior, senior year, I fell in love with research and the research aspect. And so that led to an interest in pursuing grad school and kind of learning more about the research and the science of it all. So I started my grad program in 2017. Well, I started with the state of Vermont on their moose research project in 2017. My grad program technically started the next year. But we radio collared 127 moose over a 3-year period in Essex County, Vermont, so the most northeastern portion of Vermont.
And I think that's an important thing to mention, how impactful the moose is in northern New England. It's such a staple when you think about Maine, northern New Hampshire, northern Vermont, and people want to see moose thrive here. They want to see moose thrive for a long time, and they are not thriving right now. So this research is so important.
Yeah, so moose has forever been the charismatic megafauna of the Northeast. And so, we are right on that threshold of the boreal forest, and this, moose is a species of the boreal forest. And so because we're on that threshold, though, moose are subject to a lot of the climate conditions of a southern climate, but they're a northern animal. And so we see them struggle with disease and, a changing climate and things of that nature. And so over the last 30 to 40 years, we've been seeing a large decline in moose here in northern New England. And so all the states are trying to figure out what's going on. This is important ecologically, it's important culturally, it's important economically. I mean, there's a lot of, moose tours, and you can't go into a gift shop in northern New England without seeing, a moose on every piece of, paraphernalia. And so, the state said, wow, our moose are declining rapidly, and what are we going to do about that? And so this research project was started to look at the productivity, so how many babies are being born, and the mortality, so how many of different age classes are dying or are surviving.
Which conceptually, that's not hard. Count the amount of babies, count the amount of dead things,
boy,
right?
You'd love.
But man,
turns out that critters don't like to sit still,
and they're pretty elusive. Moose are living in these habitats that aren't conducive to humans. Our legs are not that long. We're not good at walking through snow like moose are. So getting to those areas and learning about the biology of them is not as intuitive as it seems. And I think that even starts with the process of radio collaring them, which is so cool to learn about because, again, you don't think of the actual execution of how do we put a collar on a massive moose.
Yeah, so it turns out critters are really good at doing what they do, which is staying alive, and specifically moose. You can't just lure them into a salt lick and slip a collar over their over their head. They cover large ranges. They often exist at low densities. And so one of the best ways to find moose is from the air. So we were using helicopters. We were starting with helicopter surveys and doing this in the come on, Joey. And doing this in the up. So we were using helicopters and doing this in the winter months, and moose, brown, right, big, large, brown animal against a white backdrop of snow, they're really easy to see. And so we'd start with surveys, we'd go out and we'd identify them, and then we had a radio collar crew who was out of New Mexico. There were a bunch of cowboys they'd get the moose moving, so they'd fly over the moose and they'd get them on their feet and moving, and then they were using aerial net gunning. So when guys clipped into a helicopter, leaning out the window, and the helicopter pilot would get over the moose and bank it sideways, and boom, they'd shoot off this net. The moose would get tangled up in the net, fall down. 2 guys would jump out of the helicopter, run over, hobble it, and front to back. Instead of putting the 2 front legs together, they'd put a front leg with a back leg because moose need the 2 legs to move in a certain way to move. Anyway, put a blindfold over the moose, and once that blindfold was on, the moose just calmed right down, just laid right there, and they would take a variety of different biological samples. They would take winter tick counts and weights of calves. That was a phenomenal data set that we had. So the helicopter itself has a load scale in it, used for cranes, and they would hover over and they'd put the calf in a big tarp and they'd lift it up. And they'd get a sense for the weight. It's within 5 to 10 pound accuracy, which is impressive. Then they would put a radio collar on it, a couple of ear tags. Again, we would take blood. So we had a full blood panel on the ear capture on all these animals. And they'd let them go. And a key part of this is that you didn't hear me talk about immobilization. So they weren't using drug. And usually, a lot of times, wildlife capture, because they need to handle them, they need to use drug to keep the animal from freaking out. But of course, as soon as you introduce something into that animal system that it's not used to dealing with, there's just a variety of other problems that can happen. And so this crew, I believe they got to be pushing 1,000 moose that they've done now.
Wow.
And, and are capturing working the animals up and releasing them without drugging, so that animal can work through the stress associated with this, because of course it's a stressful event, in the most, in the minimalistic impact possible.
It's about as alien as it gets. These people dropping from the sky and knocking you down and putting a blindfold, taking some blood, and then just disappearing into space.
And then running all your biological samples through a bunch of machines and then get back to the lab. Yeah.
Oh man, absolutely wild. And so you found some pretty profound things during the study, especially what's actually impacting the moose population, because it might not be what you think it is. It's a much smaller culprit, and it's really amazing thinking of the biology. Actually, we should introduce what this is, and then I'll continue the conversation.
Yeah, so, it wasn't necessarily a novice discovery in our study. We knew that the surrounding states were dealing with winter tick infestations. And so what we were looking for in Vermont specifically was just what do those numbers look like? We know what's happening, but how bad is it? And so the winter tick is, well, it's a tick, but it's a unique tick in the fact that it's a single host species. So most ticks jump from, we think of deer ticks and Lyme disease as kind of...
Deer ticks and dog ticks are like the two types of ticks that we often think about, right?
That we have here in the Northeast.
Oh, right. In New England. Sorry, I forget that other people exist sometimes.
And so, most of these species, they get on an animal, they take a blood meal, they drop off, they change life stages. They go through some kind of molt, then they climb up onto a leaf, they get onto another animal. And so they may have 3 to 4 hosts, so they're multi-host tick species throughout their life. Well, the winter tick is a single-host species, meaning it gets on as a larva. This tiny little, it's about the size of a pepper flake. And they get on by the hundreds. And then
they're specific to moose, right? Like that winter tick can't attack to you or me or...
It can, but it needs weeks and months.
Oh, and we're groomers.
So the difference is we shower.
Yeah.
Well, we hope you shower.
Yeah.
And so we'll get into how it exactly affects the moose, but just the winter tick itself is a single host species. It stays on the moose. It goes through, I believe, it's 5 or 6 life stage changes, and it ends up as this large adult.
Large, like a grape.
So when the female engorges...
Large. Concerningly
when the female engorges and takes her last blood meal before she drops off and lays her eggs, she engorges to about the size of a grape. And so it's 1 to 2 milliliters of blood per tick. And so, this is a moose. What's a couple milliliters of blood, right?
They're massive.
Yeah, well, the problem is sheer numbers. So part of what we were doing was tick counts on deceased calves. And so we were actually counting, all of the ticks on half of that moose calf's hide once it was dead. And so we counted, I think in our study, the highest that we saw was 66,000.
1,000
on a full moose hide. So again, we're counting half the hide, multiplying it by 2. So I think we counted 33,000.
And the method there was like you're taking the hide and then you're doing transects of little squares, and then you're counting the amount on the square, and then you're scaling that up to what the whole hide would be.
We're counting every tick on half of that hide.
Oh, on every... Okay, yeah.
But yes, we did. We transected it out.
But you assume that the other half has similar numbers.
Exactly. And, could we have counted every single one? Would there have been 1,000 tick difference? Maybe. But, counting half of that, we were pretty confident. But we did. We would transect it out in 10 by 10 centimeter squares, and we'd give them all numbers. We'd take a picture of it, and then we would record per square how many ticks were there, and so we could actually get a gradient on the calf. So we were also studying kind of where are these moose coming into contact with them, where's the tick attaching.
Did you find that the ticks lined up with blood supply, like where the veins are and where...
By the time that we were counting ticks, these moose had already groomed, right? And I'm using that term, I guess this is a good time to get right into it. Moose are stimulus groomers, meaning they don't groom until they itch. You and I, we are programmed groomers. We get in the shower every night. You get some dirt on you, you wipe it off. You watch your dog lick itself.
Joey's a very good programmed groomer.
They're programmed groomers. So these winter ticks are out there getting on everything. The difference is the moose just doesn't clean itself. And so, so we would see that the areas that moose could not reach had the highest. So behind the ears, oh my goodness, we would see places the size of a quarter that had 55 ticks jammed into it. On the back side of the legs, up around the anus. It was atrocious. Just lines of grapes. But yeah, so we were counting these ticks. I think
So you got 66,000 ticks taking a 1 to 2 milliliter blood meal. I mean, no matter how tough you are as an animal, that's going to be significant impact, if not kill it.
And if they took 1 or 2 milliliters of blood, 1 to 2 milliliters of blood per tick through time, they could probably make up for that. But the key to the winter tick is that all of those adult females are taking that blood meal at a very specific time of year. So they're taking it within a 2-week window, usually, 2 to 3 week window. Well, that 2 to 3 week window is occurring in, March late March, early April. And so I believe April 15th was our mean death date. So I guess, let's call it the first 2 weeks.
Real close to 420.
So, let's call it those the first 2 weeks of April. And that's when a moose calf or any moose is designed to be physiologically in as poor of shape as possible. So what a moose does to get through the winter, moose are designed to do 2 things. Make it through the winter and kick wolves in the face. And so they have really long legs that helps them walk through the snow. And they're fast against land-based predators. And so they store up a bunch of fat in the fall. They're eating all summer long, and they're trying not to expend a lot of energy. Of course, there's the breeding period, but outside of that, it's all about putting fat on.
Yeah.
The winter comes. Now they're on a really low nutrient diet. They're eating buds, barks, and stem. I mean, it's not there's no leafy greens. There's nothing. They're just eating scrapping.
Yeah.
But what they're doing is they're checking into that fat. They're taking a little bit of fat each day. And they're meant to be depleted right before green up. And green up in this part of the country is mid-April.
Yeah.
And so right when that moose doesn't have much left to give, the landscape starts to give. And that's when those fresh emerging leaves have an unbelievable amount of nutrients, and that moose, comes out healthy on the other side. But this winter tick, the moose-tick relationship is so unique because the tick is taking that blood meal 2 weeks too
when they're
early.
the weakest they possibly could be.
Exactly. And so we don't see mortality in every moose because some moose are big. All moose are big. But moose calves in particular, and by calves we're talking about ones that were born the previous May, so they're like 11 months old. And at that time period, it's a weight game. It's all a numbers game. How much blood do I need to utilize my organs, to, take the steps that it takes to eat this food? And you're removing blood while they're in a poor condition. So we didn't see a high mortality of our adults. We saw 90% survival of our adults, whereas we saw 50% almost on the nose survival of our calves over a 3-year period.
So half of the calves that were born during the study died.
That we radio collared.
That were radio collared, yeah.
During the study. And we had 90 calves radio collared throughout that 3-year period. So I think it was 44 or 46, somewhere in there. And of course, I'm tapping into 4-year-old knowledge here.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I should or should not upload on my Patreon the video you took of all the moose ticks on the hide, and it's pretty graphic. If anybody on Patreon wants that, let me know. I won't shell shock you in that way.
I was gonna say, if someone's interested.
Yeah, it's pretty graphic, but it's also extremely interesting.
Yeah, I mean, these really, I gotta think that as far as a way to go, winter tick infestation's got to be one of the worst.
So I think a really natural next question would be, why is this a problem now? Has this always been a problem and we just never had radio collared moose? Or, what's going on now that's making the moose situation so bad and the population start to decline?
Everything's connected, right? Everything's a big cycle. So the winter tick has been here forever. I mean, this isn't some new phenomenon. The new phenomenon was...
New tick just dropped.
we extirpated moose for the landscape in the late 1800s, early 1900s, right? We just like we did every other wildlife species. They started to come back mid-1900s. By the 60s, 70s, they started to show up in this country. So there was no hunting season. It had been, in most states, it was at the legislative level, hunting had been removed. And by the 80s, so you get this moose population that's growing with almost no predation. We don't have wolves. We don't have mountain lions. Contrary to popular belief, we do not have these large predators on our landscape. And so these moose had no competition per se. Mm-hmm. And then in the late 70s, early 80s, the spruce budworm came through. And so that is insect that affects the trees. I know this is a long story, but we're getting
It's
there.
okay. We're patient.
This is an insect that affects specifically fir trees, balsam fir, but it's called the spruce budworm. Anyway, we saw massive die-offs of our forests. And so these large paper companies or these industrial forest lands wanted to salvage that. You know, it's standing dead, but if we cut it now, we can still use that. So we had these monstrous clear cuts put in on the landscape. Fast forward 10 years into the late 80s, early 90s, and now you have this huge flush of vegetation that's perfect. It's just at moose height. Moose are
For browsing,
vegetarians, and so you had unbelievably good habitat characteristics and no predation. And by the late 80s, the population had absolutely exploded. And so come the 90s, I believe we started hunting moose in Vermont in 93, I believe it was, or 94. With a very low take to start off, like 50 moose the first year, something like that. And the hunt started to ramp up as they realized that there were so many moose, but the damage was done. The moose population got too high. It was beyond its ecological carrying capacity. And Mother Nature takes care of herself. And so she said, here's a little bit, I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of tick up in here. So those same clear cuts that were so great for browse were the perfect questing height, so this is a new word. So questing.
This is so important actually for all tick knowledge, because I think a lot of people, when they think of ticks, a lot of people are really scared of ticks, as you should be. They carry a lot of diseases.
They're absolutely disgusting.
And you should absolutely groom yourself. But I think a lot of people think when they're walking through a forest, when they're walking just outside, like a tick could just kind of like drop from the sky and land on you, or like
people think they jump.
They're jumping from the trees or nearby, but what they're actually doing is questing.
Yeah, and so questing is when a tick climbs up onto the end of a piece of vegetation, and each tick at different life stages quests at different heights compared to their preferred host, which is just wild. But they climb up and they've got 8 legs, and they hold on with their bottom 3, and their top 2 just swing.
I'll display it for the YouTube watchers.
Swing in the breeze. Here we go. Here's Riley questing, and then as something comes along, they've got these little hook. They hook on and they climb. They climb on, and so these winter ticks in particular quest in what we call tick bombs, which is just as insidious as it sounds. I mean, they're hundreds, 200, 400, 600 of these little tiny pepper flakes all bundled together, and they form these tick chains. And so if one grabs you, they link together and
insidious.
And they pull hundreds of these ticks onto you. So these clear cuts in the late 80s, early 90s.
Clear cuts are when they log a huge area and just cut all the trees.
Exactly. We're growing up. They were perfect vegetation. They were perfect questing height. So you had moose that were really healthy that had a lot of ticks on them. And now, again, this winter tick's always been here because it's lived on our deer and these other animals in very low numbers because deer groom. Well, now you have a huge healthy animal that doesn't groom. And so the tick populations build on the moose. Now you have more ticks that fall in the landscape, but we're not noticing this because our moose are so healthy that they're not being impacted yet. So the tick population absolutely erupted right under our nose, and we didn't really know what was happening.
So because those moose had enough forage and enough energy and enough resources built up, even though there was ticks on them, it wasn't going to kill them. It would probably impact them a bit.
Sure.
But it wouldn't be enough to actually literally suck all the blood out of them and kill them.
Right, and so it wasn't enough to kill that new 1-year-old incoming age class, and it also wasn't enough yet at the time to impact productivity of adult females.
Yeah. And
so we saw, again, Mother Nature just took care of herself, and we began to see this decline starting in the early 2000s. Late, it was probably 2010 when we said, whoa, okay, why are we getting all these reports of dead calves? Like, what is going on? 2005, we were still hunting moose, hard and heavy. And then we started to see this decline that wasn't from our management. We as humans, for some reason, think that we need to be in absolute control of every population swing. And we said, okay, something's going on. And so that's kind of what spurred this region-wide research.
Very, very cool. You had told me at some point, and sorry if I kind of butcher this a little bit, but because our winters are getting a little bit warmer, what we know is climate change, and ticks if they fall off onto snow, then they would die. But if they fall off onto leaf litter, if there is not enough snow, if we're having a super mild winter, they would survive. And is that contributing to these increased tick numbers and these increased, mortality of moose? Or
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. So the winter tick is all, it is a southern parasite. Again, we live at the intersection of the northern hardwoods and the boreal forest. And so it needs a few things. It needs to quest and get onto an animal during snow off conditions, right? Once it snows in the fall, the ticks that are out, we get these frigid cold times and those ticks can't survive. And then when it falls off, that adult female who's the size of a grape needs to crawl under a leaf and lay her eggs, like 8,000 at a time. So I'm just going to throw this out here. Imagine there's 50,000 ticks on a moose, and half of those are females. So you got 25,000 adult females. Oh, hi, Rick.
Hey, Rick.
We got 25,000 adult females, and they all lay 8,000 eggs. How many ticks is that?
That's a lot of ticks.
I can't do that math.
Yeah.
That's a lot of ticks.
Somebody can.
So, at any rate, they need to fall off onto leaf litter. And so historically in the northern parts of the state and in core moose range, we had winters that started in October and that ended in late March. And now we're not seeing real heavy winter conditions until mid-December this year. Winter didn't set in. I was going to say,
has winter happened yet this year?
Until January, you know. And also we're seeing earlier springs. And so you're improving. And again, going back to when we had so many moose, you have this huge vat of hosts for the tick, but you're also providing them with better climatic
Question.
conditions.
If green up happened earlier because of climate change as well, say it happened at April 5th, we had green up, right? Do you think the increased nutrients and healthiness of the moose would allow them to survive that huge blood meal that happens around April 15th?
Oh, that's a really good question.
I guess my question is, are the ticks programmed around that time based on climate conditions or based on something else biological? Like, are those clocks different?
So, first answer, I don't know.
Nope, you have to answer.
Second answer is most things, most animals, most things in the natural world are based on sun.
Yeah.
It's all based on the number of minutes of sun. And so I would suspect that, but we do see in a lot of our trees, if we get warm early conditions, we'll see an early green up. We saw that last year.
We see it all the time.
Well, last year we saw that early green up, and then a frost came at a very normal time period, and it decimated all of our oak, it decimated all of our beech. It was really impressive. So at any rate, to your point, yeah, because it is, again, it's that numbers game. It's all about nutrition.
Yeah.
And so, and it's really, the bud, before the bud even pops on a tree, there's things happening in it, right? Like in the days before that, there's sugars. There's all these things
increased transport to the extremities of the leaves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so those moose really don't even need the leaf to pop as much as they just need the process to start.
Yeah.
And so to your point, it's possible. Now, I would conjure that if we were in a position where our green up had shifted so much, I would think that other conditions, like moose are really susceptible to heat stress.
Oh, yeah.
So moose are meant for cold. And in the summertime, when there's certain temperatures are reached, moose spend more time resting and panting than they do eating. And so now you're creating conditions where that moose is not taking in the nutrients during that fattening up period as much as it should be, and you're leading them into winter in a poorer condition. So there's a reason that we're at the southern extent of moose range, and it's because just below us it's too warm. It's too warm, and there's more parasites and there's all sorts of things.
Which also, so the northern populations of moose in Canada and northern Maine, they're actually doing quite well, right? Because of this, they still have those hardy winters, and they're still able to kind of kill off that tick population and have a seasonal difference,
And
less carryover.
and their moose are bigger.
And their moose are bigger.
I'm not gonna. There's a rule, and I'm not gonna try to say it because I butchered every time. But the further north you go, the larger animals are, and that's both within species. Like for example, like a mature buck white-tailed deer, live weight in Florida is like 110, 120 pounds, whereas in northern Maine it's pushing 300 pounds.
Dang.
Live weight. So yeah, and we still have a stronghold of moose in the Northeast for sure, and that's in northern Maine. And we can kind of see actually that gradient of where ticks are impacting moose. And the state of Maine is doing some really cool research right now where they have an adaptive hunting unit where they're trying to see if they can stop the spread of ticks northward by reducing populations right at that
cusp.
Right at that cusp.
Awesome. And I guess that would be the last question I'd ask on the realm of moose in case people don't care about moose. We'll move on to other topics too, but I think it's fascinating. I know a lot of people think it's fascinating, but I guess everybody's kind of natural question is, so what do we do? Because humans, I mean, we are now heavily involved in managing everything around us.
Sure.
So the question then goes, okay, you're doing all this research. Are you going to put frontline on all the moose out there and hope that they just don't get ticks on them? Or like, what is a biologically reasonable route to go about managing?
Yeah. So, everyone wants to save the moose, myself included. I mean,
too.
like that's, that's been the dedication of my work for quite a long time. And so we get some of our most common inquiries are, why can't we put a tick collar on them? Mm-hmm. Right? It works on my dog. Well, it cost us between $1,200 and $1,400 per moose to capture them and put a collar on them.
And ethically, should we be walking around collaring things?
Well, that's a good place to start. And the moose biologist of Vermont once made the comment to me, we're not in the business of farming wildlife.
Love that.
We're in the business of managing. And so just, humans are here, we're part of the system, and how can we, help these species to thrive within a biologically, an ecologically and social caring capacity. So with that in mind, hypothetically, people want to step in because they're good-hearted. Like all of these comments come from a really good place.
Yeah.
And so it's really expensive to capture moose. If we were going to treat moose, hypothetically, it's really not reasonable, but hypothetically, you'd have to treat us like 70 to 75% of the population in order to have an impact on the parasite. So that leads us to the next one that we hear all the time, which is paintball guns. Well, put ivermectin in some paintball guns and give them to every hunter in the woods. Every time they see a moose, just shoot. Okay, again, I'm following you on the logic here, but the problem is we need to know how much of a dose. Every moose needs a certain dose. We need to know how much of the dose is. And if one moose is just really susceptible to seeing hunters, well, now you've got a moose.
And we know there's some social moose out there that love to make an appearance in some town.
Oh, my God.
That went about as bad as it possibly could.
Hold on.
We just had a little bit of an event.
Oh, my God. You try to be fancy one time and drink some wine.
We tried to drink wine for like the first time ever, and then we had a major disaster with the animals running around, knocking something down, knocking over a wine glass, spilling all over the ground and the couch, breaking the wine glass. But anyway.
So back to the moose. So I'll wrap this up. What do we do about it?
Yeah.
I mean, because that is the question. So the paintball guns don't necessarily work. The tick collars don't work. We've heard about, we'll put down a salt lick and put some ivermectin hung rags in the moose trails, and they'll rub up on it. Again, dosage issues.
Also, just humans are so funny. Like, oh my God, nature's doing something that we don't enjoy. Inject it with all of the drugs we've ever discovered.
So another option, and probably the most, again, I'm not saying just
realistic.
The most realistic would be spraying for the ticks. There's a very specific that's the difficult thing about these ticks is that they're only off the moose for a very short period of time. Off the moose and on the land,
on the
above the ground, right? Because the eggs go all summer underneath the leaves. And so this is 3 to 5 week period where you could hypothetically spray from airplanes, right? Okay, try to DDT.
I literally was going to say, has this ever worked out in the history of humans ever? When we're like, oh, if we just spray this one thing, it's only going to affect one single thing in the environment, right? There will be no unintended side effects from this.
So the massive parts, the unintended side effects, but also you got to think about landowners. You know, you can't just go spraying like anywhere you want, and the large landowners up here, you know, may not take very kind for that. But at the end of the day, I think it really comes down to we're not in the business of farming moose, but we want to manage for healthy moose. And so and that's where I think we need to start shifting our mindset, is instead of managing for a number of moose, starting managing for probably less numbers, but more healthier moose. And so having
quality over quantity.
Exactly. And so the reality is you need to lower the moose density to a point where the winter ticks are not having these large, you know, there's not enough host for the tick to have population booms. And unfortunately, that number is probably lower than most people would like to see. You know, that right now in that northern part of Vermont, somewhere around a moose per square mile, a little over a moose per square mile. And, you know, we may need to be in the 0.3, 0.2. And I'm just throwing those numbers out there, but it's uncomfortably low for a lot of people who have built a business, right? Imagine if your job is to have a moose tour. Right, I'm going to take you out, and I guarantee you see a moose or your money back.
But the thought there is if there's less hosts for the tick to attach onto, which would allow it to engorge and then reproduce, then if there's not enough hosts, there's going to be less of that parasite that's able to continue that population.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so at the end of the day, there's kind of two options. One is let Mother Nature do what Mother Nature's going to do, and that is she's going to reduce the population to a point where the ticks can't sustain themselves, and then we'll see a bump in moose, and it'll be cyclical through time. Or we assist in getting the population to that point. And so, you know, moose is a renewable resource. It's a phenomenal source of protein. We hunt them. They're a game species. And so we could increase permit issuance, which is actually what the state of Vermont is
currently
doing, following the research that we did. They looked at the numbers, and I commend them for it. They looked at the numbers and they said, well, we need to lower moose density.
Right, and that is not easy to make that decision because people are so emotionally attached to these animals. But at the end of the day, the research is saying if we can lessen these densities of moose, we're going to end up having a more sustainable population of healthy moose. Yeah, moving forward. So it's going to be a little uncomfortable for a minute, but like this is where trust the science like really comes in. Yeah. We need to trust the data, the numbers, the management practices over our emotional attachment. I'm emotional with moose. I love moose. I absolutely love moose. But, you know, you got to trust the science, and just saying like, I love moose. I think there should be more forever.
Can I be radical for a second?
Absolutely.
So I love moose. I'm going to say it more than anybody. I mean, I spent 3 years like literally watching moose calves be born. I mean, these animals are very near and dear to my heart. The best biological solution to this is a calf hunt.
Ooh.
So the hunting season occurs when those calves are 7 to 8 months old. So they're in the we're talking live weight, they're in the 350 to 450 range. And these are the individuals that are most likely to die via winter tick, and they're most likely to carry these ticks into places that other moose are.
Are you saying hunt for the males and then try to...
No, hunt for the calves.
God. Calf males?
No.
All of them?
Calves. The ticks don't care.
But how does the population continue on if we're killing all the youngins?
So this is the idea of additive mortality, right? So compensatory versus additive. Compensatory is this moose was going to die anyway, and we removed it from the landscape. Additive is that moose was going to live another year, and we removed it from the landscape. So your adult male, he's going to live another year. So let him live another year, spread genes, be part of population growth. That cat, we know 50% of these calves are going to die. So if we take 70, 100 of these calves off the landscape, the majority of those were going to die due to winter tick.
I see. That is.
Yeah, that one's. That's
a tough one.
So that's pure science.
That's also the emotion things. I'm literally like thinking of killing babies, and I'm like, that seems really wrong.
I will tell you though, a calf moose is still a big animal.
Big animal. Yeah.
But yes, it's tough smell, and it'll never happen. So they do this.
Right.
They do this in Sweden. They do this in Norway. It's very common practice.
Yeah.
It's how they manage, because that incoming age class is supposed to be susceptible to the highest mortality.
Yeah.
So again, that's just, a little radical. It will never fly in the U.S., but
it's interesting to see what other countries are doing that works and what the different options are. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. Your research was super important. And also, shout out to my PI during grad school, Dr. Matthew Burton, because when you graduated and you defended your thesis, Matt Burton went to your thesis.
Matt Burton.
I love Matt Burton.
Showed up. So a little bit. So I defended March 5th of 2020.
That's right when the pandemic was hitting.
So my defense was the first. So I got a call. Riley had come up. She was in Rhode Island at the time. We were lacing up our shoes and getting ready to drive to the defense. And my PI called me and said, "Dude, crazy thing. They're locking down the schools. Like, no one can come in. We've got to do this virtually." I'm like, "Virtually? What's there's this program called Zoom. You'll have to download it on your computer. Like, we've got like 2 hours to get this together." And so this happened last second.
This is so cool. You were the first virtual defense in graduate school. I was the first in-person defense after the pandemic.
After COVID.
How crazy is that?
Oh, COVID.
I know the pandemic is still like relevant, but I was the first one after things opened back up that I really wanted my defense to be in person. And you obviously didn't have that ability because of how intense it was at that time. But
that was wild. So Matt Burton says, "Oh, geez, well, look at this opportunity. I'm going to cease it," because he was down in Rhode Island. And so he hopped on that Zoom call. He got the invitation and he attended. Not only did he attend,
he asked a really good question.
He asked one of the best questions. And I wish I could remember exactly what it was. We'll talk to him about it.
He's just a very smart scientist. So it was cool, like seeing his brain work in a different way about the biology and the moose. And
smart and thoughtful.
Yeah. Awesome. I think as we're kind of talking about northern habitat and moose and this kind of region, it would make sense to have a seamless transition into chaga, because I think we should talk about chaga.
So that even goes better, because it was during COVID that our obsession with chaga really popped off.
Absolutely. So chaga is a medicinal fungus. You'll hear me call it a fungus, not a medicinal mushroom, because it is not a mushroom. When we think in our head like what a mushroom is, it's that classic like almost like phallic like mushroom. And I know, a little intense, but a fungus is not a mushroom. It's not that fruiting body. It's a different type of growth. It can be mycelium, but the chaga fungus, the scientific name is Annonatus obliquus, and it's a really interesting fungus because it's kind of unique to these northern regions across the world. That includes where we're at here in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, but it also includes areas in China and in Russia and these different longitudinal
ecotones
across the world. So an ecotone is essentially,
it's a band around the world that it all comes back to the sun that gets a certain amount of sun per year during the Earth's rotations, and so they have similar growing seasons.
Yeah.
So we see a lot of similar plants, funguses, animals. That's why you heard to talk about moose in Sweden. We have moose here. They're all in the same ecotone.
Yeah, and the chaga fungus, it's one of these really staple medicinal fungi. And what's really cool about it, it is jet black. I mean, like almost.
It looks like a burnt piece of bread.
Yeah, but so burnt that the black is like so intense, and it grows almost exclusively on birch trees, all types of birch trees. That's white birch, yellow birch, all the different
hawthorn beam, but hawthorn beam is also in the betula family.
I was gonna say a couple others, but it is in the same family as.
Is it Betulaceae?
Betulaceae. Yeah.
I always struggled with my Latin names.
Yeah. So the chaga fungus, it's a slow growing fungus. You'll see it as this big conch on the trunk of typically a birch tree. The inside is like this deep orange color.
Golden.
And then the outside is this pitch black. So that outside part, that's that pitch black, that's called sclerotia. And sclerotia is not unique to just chaga. Many different fungi have it. And the purpose of sclerotia is to protect the fungi. So
Protected from what?
yeah, from the environment. So again, up here we have pretty harsh environments. We have, I mean, a lot of UV rays, but also we have really crazy deviations in temperature. We have really hot summers, and we have really cold winters. And that black nature of the outside of this fungus is really what provides, I think, one of the best antioxidants in nature. Actually, I'm going to put it as number one. I think it's the best antioxidant that nature has to offer. Typically, when we think of colored compounds like carotenoids, which are yellow, or flavonoids, which are purples and blues, and chaga, which is black, because there's so many of these colored compounds, these are your antioxidants in nature. And I've actually done laboratory analysis on chaga during grad school. Again, shout out to Matt Burton for letting me do this kind of stuff in the lab. But throughout grad school, I really started to learn about the chemistry of chaga and became absolutely infatuated with it. And I became more infatuated with it when we started to use it, because you could really feel it working in your body. And we always talked about, like, you don't really notice it until you stop taking it, and then your body definitely reacts differently. But, you know, for not including too many details here, but like keeping your body regular, reducing inflammation, we've definitely noticed just the impact on our general health and how often we get sick.
I was just going to say, just not getting those common colds that go through everywhere.
Yeah, and you know, our whole family takes it now. We've noticed it helps a lot of people with their seasonal allergies, which there is actually a lot of science there too. It's a little iffy sometimes, but
well, that was a huge thing for me. I used to have debilitating allergies. I mean, I would be put out of work for 2 to 3 days every spring and every fall. And once we started taking chaga, well, I forget if it was spring or fall, but like I just went through one allergy season and was like, oh, I never and it
wasn't
got
just
that.
you. It was you, your dad, my mom, a few of our friends. And that's when I hadn't even looked into this. And I was like, what is going on here?
Yep.
I mean, of course, there's an inflammatory aspect, and your immune system is involved in your allergy response, because that's literally what it is. But I had never read anything about this. And when you really dive into literature, you can find a few sentences. But this is not a well-documented phenomenon.
Right.
So it was kind of cool to have the experience of our community kind of leverage that in a way and kind of back it up.
Well, on the anti-inflammatory piece, I mean, you know, my uncle, who was taking 8 to 12 ibuprofens per day. I mean, he just was living on ibuprofen, was still wildly uncomfortable. He was a logger his entire life. He wore logging boots his entire life, and his back was just completely messed up. And he started taking chaga. I mean, you want to talk about a believer.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
I mean, I remember him saying to me, I haven't taken ibuprofen in a week, and this is the first time in 10 years that I've been off that.
Yeah, and what's actually crazy is we kind of perfected our chaga recipe when I was doing the research.
I was
going to
say we didn't.
Yeah, okay.
Riley did.
Not gonna lie, I did. Perfected this recipe, really this extraction method that gets all of these medicinal components out of the fungus, but also makes it shelf stable and also makes it taste good. You know, it's like a combination of all these things, getting the most out of it. And we've tried other chaga products, absolutely not as good. So what was cool though is this was our side hustle while we were both in grad school.
Yeah.
Is we started selling chaga tinctures.
Well, I think it was 2018. 2017. Yeah, 2017. I got a message from Riley. Hey, I'm learning about this new fungus. Like if you see it in the woods, you know, grab some. And I was working in the woods every day chasing moose, and was like I looked up from my phone and was like, oh, look, that
there it is.
And because it's very abundant in our northern forests.
Very abundant.
And so found it, knocked it off, we dried it, and we're like, oh, you know, this is classic Riley and I. We'll just make a small little batch.
Tiny batch.
Just enough for us. And next thing we know, we had like 12 gallons.
We're making gallons.
And we're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with this? And so we said, oh, geez, well, we'll start an Etsy, and we'll see if we can't sell any of it on it. And boy, that's
That Etsy's still alive today.
Yep.
And honestly, I think we created a really good product, and people, I mean, again, that's medicine, and people like are kind of reliant on that. We can't kind of stop making it.
I know. We have some people who are going on like 5 years
yeah.
of use. But yeah, started a side hustle that blossomed from there.
Anyway, less about us, more about the chemistry of chaga, because it's really cool.
Oh, that's right.
All right, so I'm going to talk about like the orange inner part and then the black outer part a bit more. So the black outer part of this fungus that I just referred to as the sclerotia, that has a lot of water-soluble, sugar-like molecules present. Okay, and I mentioned it's a really good antioxidant, but it also contains these sugar-like molecules that are called beta-glucans. And beta-glucans are common in a lot of different fungi, and what's really cool about them is they're sugar molecules, and our body absolutely knows how to digest sugar molecules, but they're linked in a different way than what most sugars that we take in our coffee and our fruits and the other types of non-fungal sources are. So our body, when it's kind of like when we ingest this extract and our body is trying to figure out how to metabolize it and to digest it, it's kind of like, that's a little weird. That's a little foreign. I'm not sure I know how to break that down. And actually, the presence of that does initiate the immune system in some ways to be like, is this a foreign entity? Like, do I
Work a little bit harder?
Work a little bit harder. And that's kind of that constitutive, keeping your immune system on its toes by just constantly kind of initiating it, but at low levels, so it can be almost hyper aware of what's going into it. So that's kind of the beta glucans, and of course I mentioned the antioxidant component of the sclerotia, that outside component. But just how we visually see that the black outside is different than the orange inside, the chemistry is completely different too. Completely different. So that orange inside is the mycelium, which if you've ever read Paul Stamets' book, Mycelium Running, or you've ever listened to any fungi educator,
right,
we're going to talk about mycelium a lot. And mycelium's often like referred to as like the roots of a fungi that's underground and you're constantly stepping on them. If you pull up your garden, if you pull up a plant in your garden, you're going to see that white mycelium kind of intertwined throughout. But mycelium is also what makes up that orange component of chaga. And what's cool is the mycelium does not have those antioxidant properties. It does not have that kind of protective properties. Instead, it's really known for its anti-inflammatory properties because it contains steroid-like molecules. And I think in the last episode we did together, I mentioned anodadiol. Yeah, so anodadiol is one of these main steroid components that is known to be present in chaga, great anti-inflammatory potential. But honestly, I never paid that much attention to anodadiol or to any of these compounds in the sclerotia, because if you have ever seen a chromatogram of a chaga extract,
oh right, yeah, chromatogram of a chaga extract,
it's one of the most diverse and complex extracts I have ever worked with.
Oh, that's wicked cool.
Like, I could not separate peaks on this chromatogram. It was so complex, which for almost every other natural product I work with, my entire job was to like separate peaks and collect them and figure out what the molecule was. Chaga was so complex and everything was so on top of each other. It was really difficult to like figure out exactly what that chemistry was, which I always thought was really beautiful. It means that there's redundancy. It means that there's similar molecules acting in different ways. And that's the beauty of natural products.
Did Burton ever look at
He did.
What did he think?
He thought it was really complex and crazy too.
Oh,
I mean,
cool.
My PI had traditionally worked with cyanobacteria, and I think he's going to come on for an episode of Bioactive
I hope so.
and talk about that. And I can't wait for that conversation. But, you know, those extracts were a lot simpler than this fungus. And I think a lot of that did come from the sclerotia and how sugar molecules are notoriously extremely difficult to work with. Like, there are, no lie, sugar experts who deal with like the NMR of sugars and the mass spec of sugars and the HPLC of sugars because they are so difficult to work with.
Those were a lot of letters there, but I'm trying to follow along.
Just like laboratory things, like you need a special person to be able to do it because they're not as simple as a lot of these other drug-like molecules that we work with.
That's really cool. Yeah, chaga's special. And once we started looking for it, of course we got obsessed.
Yeah, we have a problem.
And we ramped it up, and I'm going to bring this back to the ecology because I can't help it.
Oh, I was going to do that too, so keep going.
So we started noticing, like, okay, you can walk through vast expanses of the forest and not see chaga. And then in other places, it's like boom, 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 boom. And so we started narrowing in on where do you find chaga. We noticed a couple key characteristics, and one is you got to have a mature forest.
Definitely.
It's a very slow-growing mushroom.
Slow-growing mushroom.
And so you have to have a tree that's 40...
Slow-growing fungus.
Right. It's 40, 50, 60 years old. And not every forest in our neck of the woods is going to produce that. We have a lot of industrial forest lands that are managed on a rotation where that is beyond the ideal harvest. So you got to find a unique forest. And then for some reason, there seems to be a relationship between it and water course.
I think that has to do with just like the evaporation of the water and how like every fungi does better in moist environments.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, and also, like, not gonna lie, it's really fun to forage for chaga because we're often on snowshoes because we harvest chaga during the winter, which is why we're talking about this right now. That's actually probably how I should have started this conversation. But, the trees, hardwood trees like birch and hop hornbeam, they are moving a lot of liquid through them in the summer months, in the spring months, in the fall months. But during the winter, they go dormant. So they kind of stop sending all of that liquid around them. So during the summer, if you were to harvest chaga, it would be really spongy, really moist, not great for drying and extraction because it might get moldy during that process.
Because there's such a relationship between the tree and the mushroom.
Exactly. So, people who have traditionally harvested chaga and what we currently practice is harvesting the fungus once the tree has gone dormant. So really like once there's snow. And once the tree has lost its leaves and it's preparing for the winter, that's when you can go around. And we typically have an axe with us and snowshoes, and we'll hike around in these kind of unique old growth forests.
Oh, whoa.
Oh, sorry, not old growth.
No,
old forests.
Older age class
forest.
Just the concept of old growth is just such an idea that is unfortunately it's gotten more political.
Oh man, everything got political.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, that's something we really enjoy, and we are still making those products, and it's just.
And I think it's important to note, you'll hear online about chaga and how you shouldn't harvest it and it's going to go extinct, and
people are so intense.
And I think that there are areas, we were just talking about that fringe ecosystem or the fringe of the ecotone for moose, right? And like chaga is the same. There are areas that chaga doesn't grow and there are areas that it does grow. And so there are probably places you could over-harvest chaga. And I don't think that every single person should go out and knock off every piece of chaga that they see because it is so slow growing. And we don't know exactly what it does as part of the whole ecosystem, but it does something. Yeah. It has to. But we've caught flack in the past about harvesting chaga, and I don't think people realize how abundant it is in our forests. And part of that is likely because the majority of the view that people get in our forests are either from the road or from a trail.
Or from their desktop or their phone.
Okay, yeah.
I genuinely think a lot of people who comment on those types of videos are just keyboard warriors. They have no idea what they're talking about.
They saw somewhere that...
Right, and that's the importance of getting outside and touching a tree and actually,
And getting off trail.
Right, and you don't have to do that, but, don't correct people online if you have no idea what you're talking about.
Right.
But we won't get into that. That's a super negative thing to go down.
So anyway, just to finish this, if you're gonna harvest chaga, which I encourage everybody to do,
absolutely,
being part of making your own medicine is so important. And so if you're
it's
going
the cheapest, most accessible way to do it, and also most intention, is what you're saying.
Just be reasonable and be responsible. And it does not take a lot of chaga for a single person's dose.
And your first time doing it, there's a lot of mushroom forums I'm on, and people will knock down 50 pounds of chaga and be like, "Is this chaga?" And it's like, what are you doing? You don't even know what you're harvesting or what you're doing, and you're knocking down that much of it.
So I would encourage people to a softball size piece of chaga is going to get you, you're going to end up with about a quart to 2 quarts of finished tincture. If you're looking for tincture, you can take it as tea. Do you want to touch real quickly on tea versus tincture?
Just like what it is, or the medicinal components of each?
What it is and how one is more beneficial than the other.
Yeah, definitely. So tea versus tincture. Tea, I think, when you're making a tea, it's important to remember that even if in your tea mixture you have all of the components of chaga, you have the mycelium, you have the sclerotia, you're only going to be extracting the water-soluble molecules when you make a tea, right? So if you're making a tea, you're going to get all those antioxidants and those great you're going to get all those antioxidants as well as those immune stimulating properties from the sclerotia. But you're not going to get those anti-inflammatory compounds that are alcohol soluble in the mycelium. So to really get the benefits of the entire fungus, you want to be extracting the compounds from the inner part, the mycelium and alcohol, honestly, for like a couple of months. Or if you have like a setup in your house, you can do that quicker, of course. And then you also want to make a tea, which is also called a decoction. That's kind of the herbal word for what making a tea. And then you want to combine them together. And the alcohol component is going to allow for that shelf stability, but it's also going to allow your product to be diverse and to have the alcohol and the water-soluble components. So you're getting that full spectrum extract rather than, just some components. But hey, maybe you're only after the antioxidant components. Then you only need to make a tea. If you've been following my TikTok and my Instagram for a while, you might have noticed I've also tried to make topicals out of chaga. That was a adventure.
Yeah. And so I think it's just, important to note that as people are trying to be part of their own medicine, like going out, knocking off some chaga, beat it up with a hammer in like a towel or something so it doesn't go all over the place.
Well, dry it first.
Or, beat it up, dry it, beat it up, whichever. You want it to be dry and you want it to be in small chunks, and boil it on the stove for a bit.
Yeah.
Or simmer it on the stove for a bit, and it's a really easy way to start making your own medicine.
Yeah, I love that. I will add on my Patreon our general recipe for making chaga.
Wow, that's huge.
I don't share that with many people.
Wow, that is pretty big.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's enough on chaga.
Fair.
But I have a question for you.
Okay.
Have you told your listeners about the kind of exciting new adventure that you're heading down?
I've kind of hinted at it, but I haven't given details, but I feel like you might be the only guest I can comfortably tell details with and brag about myself.
Yeah, because I hadn't heard it. I hadn't heard it on your podcast, and I was wondering when it was going to be a good time to drop it.
Yeah, so I'm writing a book, which I definitely have slowly kind of released on my Instagram and these different platforms, but I haven't told any details about it. So it might be kind of fun to give a little bit of detail.
Yeah, I'm wicked excited about this.
So first of all, again, not to toot my own horn, but this is through a publishing company, a quite large publishing company, which is awesome because they typically don't really work with cannabis and really entertain cannabis. But I think, actually, let me rewind just a second here. I have an amazing literary agent who I've actually been working with for a while, off and on. And a while ago, she was kind of you should write a book. And I was like, I don't think I'm ready. And then about a year ago, we linked up again. And I said, yeah, I'm kind of ready now.
Yeah, you've had it all, but you needed someone just to kind of push you.
I needed a push.
That knew the space. Yeah. They knew the space, because that's a big jump.
Yeah, and that process is very not intuitive. I had no idea what it was like when I was prepping for that. But essentially, I wrote a book proposal and we pitched it to these publishing houses. And we actually got quite a few offers, which is amazing. And the whole premise of the book is absolutely focused in cannabis science. And it's talking about the endocannabinoid system and these different molecules the plant makes, these different consumption methods, the different conditions that might be helpful, medical patients, how that's interacting with the body. The science is there. But what's kind of special about this, it's science, but it's also personal experience. because I think that's a part that's kind of missing from a lot of these more science-focused books that I read.
Well, that's what you bring to the cannabis industry.
Like I'm reading these books by other PhDs or MDs, and I'm like, have you ever smoked weed in your life? Like that is not good advice. Like I feel like we can really break this down easier.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the rationale behind my channel, is kind of bringing in this consumer personal perspective mixed with the science to say, okay, we kind of need both these perspectives, because a lot of academic research is so important, but it's not necessarily consumer relevant. And then a lot of consumer relevant things are great, but they're not necessarily backed in science. So can we find the middle ground and really help people as a learning tool, but also as a harm reduction tool? I want people to have a good time with cannabis, and I want them to feel comfortable with this medicine and to know the different methods of dosing, to understand the different consumption methods, like open that conversation in a very just accepting way.
So down that same vein, what audience is this book going to be focusing on? Like who's going to want to pick this book up and read it?
I think new to relatively new cannabis users, or cannabis users who just want to know about the science a bit more. Maybe they have that lived experience, but they don't understand the endocannabinoid system. They don't understand what's happening in their body. Maybe a bud tender needs to help with communication tips to their audience.
Oh,
that's a big portion of it too. You know, I'm not the best scientist in the world. I can't pipette better than anyone else, but I can communicate better than a lot of people, and that's kind of what this book is focused on, is like communication, building that trust, and making people feel comfortable, and just like lowering that barrier of entry to cannabis.
I was going to use the barrier of entry.
Yes, I got it before you.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be really important, and I think it's going to be really impactful.
Yeah, the issue is I've been so excited to write this book, but I've been having trouble just like finding the time to write it. But I genuinely think bringing this up on the podcast is going to help me.
You don't have an option.
Yeah,
now.
I don't have an option. And also, I just like, you know, if people want specific things included, like I want to include patient stories, I want to include personal perspectives, and I really want the community to be part of this book, because the community has taught me so much about cannabis and these different experiences. You know, we always say everyone has a different endocannabinoid system, and like that's kind of true, but it's more of like everyone has different lived experiences, which is going to shape the way that cannabis makes them feel. And I think that's a really important tone to bring into this book, and also the importance of like being plant focused. I think a lot of times we get very pharmaceutical and talking about like, oh, this is what CBN does, this is what THC does, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, the beauty here is that we have this living plant. We have this amazing living plant that produces these hundreds of different bioactive molecules. And we can use this tool in so many different ways, but like also respecting where that came from, and respecting that plant, and respecting the legal infrastructure of it, and how many people have, you know, gone through the absolute ringer trying to get this medicine to people. Like bring in that full perspective of it's just a plant, but it's also a plant that we've co-evolved with, that other insects and animals have co-evolved with. We have this incredibly intimate link with this plant, and like how can we leverage that to heal us?
And it continues to come back to education is harm reduction.
Yeah.
And so I assume that's going to be a vein, you know, well, that's always a vein to everything that you've done.
Well, that's why I put information out there, is the more people that have a positive experience with cannabis, the better suited we are to expand our industry in so many different ways. But the more we just say like, oh, I'm going to take a 4-gram dab today, or like, you know, and that's fine for some people, but like for new users of cannabis, that's not the way we communicate. It's too much. We need to at least preach the concept of balance. I mean, that's what the ECS is all about, right? Yeah. Cannabis is all about bringing balance to our body. And I think if we treat this medicine with intention and purpose and balance and respect, and have information on it and how it acts in our body, like that is the core of how we respect this medicine.
I'm wicked excited for this book. I can't wait to have one on our coffee table. Do you think?
Oh, we're gonna have 40 on our coffee.
Do you think you'll want to? Do you think you'll want to read it once you've gone through the whole process of writing it?
Yeah.
That's awesome. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't read my dissertation since.
Well, that's exactly where my head
but
was.
my dissertation wasn't fun to read. I feel like a huge portion of this is graphics. And that's what's awesome about working with a large publishing house is like you are able to facilitate those awesome graphics and like use that as a communication tool too.
That's awesome. I can't wait for it.
Thanks for bringing it up. All right, cool. I think one last topic, unless you have anything else. I have been ending pretty much every episode with saying, la 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 la, mad love.
Yeah, hadn't noticed.
No, I've been saying mad love a lot, right? And I've actually noticed a lot of other people have been saying mad love too. And it makes me so happy. But also, people are kind of like, have I heard that before? But I think a lot of people are used to saying much love instead of mad love. And I got mad love from you saying mad love, and you got mad love from one of your best friends. So I think out of absolute respect for Jeff,
we got to give a shout out.
We got to give a shout out to Jeff and also talk about the origin of mad love, because it's like, I literally signed my emails with mad love.
And Jeff would be so pumped for mad love to work its way through the universe.
Yeah,
you know, because
he's such a loving person.
That's Jeff's perspective.
Oh, I love
it's
Jeff.
Just like mad love. So it started in high school, right when we got out of high school into college. You know, you separate from your high school friends and you're doing your own thing.
Yeah.
And you meet up on weekends, and you know, our high school clique is still really tight. We still hang out, and we've always been like that, you know, kind of brother tight. But when you're leaving someone, like, you know, when you're leaving your girlfriend, you'd say, love you, you know, leaving your parents, hey, love you. But you're leaving your boys, like, you can't be like, love you, you know?
You can.
Well, sure. But within the male archetype that we were living in at the time, it just didn't fit.
Sure.
And so Jeff one day just dropped like, yo, mad love, bro. And it just like, it hit. And it stuck in that entire friend group.
I think because it also fit his personality so well.
You know, so it's this recognition of the appreciation for the person that you're with without having to cross into that like, I love you boundary.
But it's also like a hybrid of like mad respect and like much love.
Yeah.
It's mad
and
love.
so it entered our friend group, and it's just been every time I've exited a phone call for the last probably 10 years with Jeff, with Andrew, with Ian, with a bunch of my boys, it's been mad love.
And I like accidentally started saying it in the beginning of one of these episodes. I just ended like, hey, mad love. And then I was like accidentally doing it again. And I was like, I'm going to keep doing that. And I think it's just such a positive way to end a conversation. I mean, we tell our friends all the time, like, love you, mad love. Dude, like my friends know, like when I'm stoned, I'm video chatting them just to tell them how much I love them. and my friends have started saying mad love too. And I think that's like, it's really special to start building that like loving community, you know?
So to Jeff, Riley's going to spread your mad love through the world.
I hope so. And yeah, I just want to get out there that I didn't invent that word. I don't know if anyone else has ever said that word, but I got that word from Jeff. And Jeff is a super special person in our lives. So
Mad love, Jeff.
Mad love, Jeff.